The mission of FSU Coach is to prepare and equip the next generation of coaches and sports professionals with best practices and current research to enable them to pursue excellence. We have two academic programs, the online graduate certificate, which is 4 classes, and also a 10-class master's in athletic coaching. Our graduate certificate and master's program can be started at any time, either the summer, fall, or spring. All of our classes have the word coach or coaching in them, and they're taught by coaches for coaches.
The types of classes that we offer focus on the athlete as a whole person. We focus on the theory and practice, the research, the helping skills, even some of the mental performance behind what it goes into being an athlete. I came to FSU Coach because I truly believed in the mission and the purpose of the program.
I think I have my dream job being a head coach at Florida State, but I know there's always more ways that I can help my athletes and better prepare as a coach, so I thought joining this master's program would help me learn different ways to attack my job. If you're interested in going into coaching or joining the FSU Coach program, I would just say don't even think about it and do it.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. My name is Tim Baghurst, and today's special guest is TJ Baumbaugh. She is the commissioner of the Ladies Professional Racquetball Tour, the LPRT. TJ, thanks so much for joining me. If you wouldn't mind, just share a little bit about how you became commissioner.
Sure. Thank you, Tim, Dr. Baghurst, for having me on the show. So I was a player. I played the pro tour for a while, for about 10 years. And I knew I was at the end of my career, and I was in a place where I could give back a little bit. And I got involved as player representative on the board of directors at the time. And I found myself really involved in what was going on. The commissioner at the time was asked to leave. The deputy commissioner stepped up a little bit, and it really evolved from there. And then the deputy commissioner at that time left, and kind of left suddenly, and left things in my hands, and I ran with it.
So it kind of, you become commissioner because there's no one else around. I mean, that's pretty crazy.
It really was. And one of the challenges at that time was the previous administration got rid of the board of directors at the time. So
wow. It
literally was just me. It was a challenge. And one that I saw a need for and didn't mind stepping into. I felt ready for it and kind of ran with things.
I'm sure people watching or listening, whether live or in the future, don't really know too much about racquetball. We know it used to be very, very popular back in the 80s, maybe even 90s. But since then, we don't see it as much. It's not on ESPN. What is the Pro Tour? What does it look like from a athletic point of view if somebody wants to be an athlete?
So the Women's Pro Tour, the Ladies Professional Racquetball Tour, is a series of racquetball tournaments, a series of events where the tour players travel from city to city, and they compete against each other to earn ranking points and money in both singles and doubles. And they represent themselves as far as individual play goes, but they do also, they represent their country, they represent their family, etc. And they compete. They're fiercely competitive. Most of the events are in the United States, but we do have other events in mostly Mexico, South America, because that's predominantly where the tour players are coming from right now, where racquetball is popular.
In terms of your job, then, what is your job? What are your roles and responsibilities as the commissioner?
You see, you often say that you never really understand what somebody's job is until you step into that position. And I hands down agree with that. I create the schedule for the tour. I work with tournament directors in those different cities, and I schedule the events. I try not to conflict with international events where players are going to play Pan Am Championships, or if they're playing for their country in another event, or their country's nationals or something like that. I manage the players. I make sure they have all the information that they need to be able to go and compete on tour, as far as prize money and travel and where they're going, when they're going, local information that they need. And then I work with the tournament directors. I mean, that's tournament directors and sponsors. Each location not only has local sponsors that support the tour, but we also have tour sponsors. So gaining tour sponsors and creating that relationship and making sure that we're giving back to all of our sponsors as a return, whether it's running commercials or signage at an event, or whatever that relationship is.
The job description sounds like a full-time job. Is it something you do full-time or part-time? How does it work?
It absolutely could be a full-time job, no question. I will say that I do something for the tour every single day. I mean, 7 days a week, typically, there's something that needs answered, or an email that needs answered, or questions, or there's always something. Players have questions. It's not lucrative enough at this point that I don't have another job. I do. I'm also a personal trainer that gives me flexibility to do this. I create my own schedule. So I have ability to take time off when I need to.
When you say it could be, what is missing? Is it just sponsorship of the tour that would enable somebody to have a job as commissioner? Where, I mean, we see the big sports, right? Commissioners are making serious money.
Yes.
What is missing?
I mean, money is a big factor. A lot of the big sports have major television broadcast rights, and that they get a lot of money from. We aren't. We're not a big sport. We're trying to grow again, trying to grow a sport that was so booming and popular in the 1980s and early 90s that, at least in the US, it's taken a dip. So we're trying to grow again. At this point, we're able to, thank goodness for technology, we're able to stream live, but that's free. We provide it free just to get the sport and the players out there and the tour out there in front of as many eyes as we can. So money is a big factor for sure. And really the money that we do bring in, we put into the players' hands. We put into prize money. We try to elevate the tour and our equipment and our streaming equipment and social media and all of those things. That's where our money goes right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, just a reminder, if you're watching and you want to ask TJ a question, just put it in your chat box and we'll try to get it to her. When you talk about growing the sport, where's the responsibility of a pro tour to grow the sport versus national organizations, local communities, et cetera? How do you navigate that? Because being the pinnacle of the sport, one might expect, well, should be your job.
It's a good question. I mean, my quick answer is that it's everybody's responsibility. Locally, I mean, you rely on local people where courts are to introduce new people and juniors and men and women to the sport. But on a pro level, I mean, we're the final tier. It's something for juniors to work toward. It's something for high schoolers and collegiate players to work toward, and we should be the most exposed out of anybody. I mean, we are what should be the advertisement for the sport. I mean, you look at Major League Baseball or WNBA or anything like that, and I mean that is the ad, right? Yeah. That is how you market a sport to other people.
When you look at professional sports and compare it to pro racquetball, what is missing other than finances? We know that finances are an issue. You talked about that. How else can you and others in the sport promote the sport so that it becomes more visible? You talked about streaming, the fact that it's freely accessible. You talked about, players. Well, you didn't really, but players themselves could promote the sport. Is there anything that the average person watching or the average person who plays do in order to help grow the sport and the tour?
I mean, those who play, just introducing new people. We're in a new age where we've really experienced that, or I've, excuse me, been involved long enough where we went from a time where social media wasn't a big deal to learning how to market a business on social media. I mean, that was a whole learning curve for us as a tour. And we're still doing that. We're still trying to research how do we maximize our exposure. Social media is free. Excuse me. Social media is a free platform for us. So just trying to maximize that. Encouraging and teaching the players how to also maximize and market their own exposure, because the more people they reach, the more people the tour reaches.
That's a good point.
And we want to do that because the more reach we have, the more sponsors we get in return, right? Sponsors want they want to reach their brand in front of as many people as possible, and we want to do the same. As far as the tour goes, back to your question about how do we help grow the sport? One of the other things the tour does, we're committed to doing community outreach in all of the locations and cities that we travel to. We hope to do juniors clinics or women's clinics or that kind of thing. So just getting some of those local people in front of the pro tour players, introduce them to the sport, even if they've never played. And hopefully all of a sudden they have an inkling what the ladies professional racquetball tour is. Maybe they look us up online. Maybe they follow us. Maybe they make a connection with one of the players. We hope that happens.
Mm. The tour itself, you talked about or briefly mentioned, is about the players, right? It's not a business. It's not a for-profit where you have shareholders, or if they are, it really is the players. How do you secure new places to develop new tournaments, which then generate new revenue through prize money, et cetera, for players? What's the process for doing that?
I was just talking to one of the players this past weekend about that. When you look historically at the women's tour, I don't know so much the men's tour, but when you look historically at the women's tour, a lot of our locations for our events are locations where we already have pro players. We've been, excuse me, we've been in the Virginia area. First, we've been there because when I played, the local community got together and hosted an event. Now we'll be headed to Virginia Beach likely because we have a pro player there. We used to go to Cincinnati because there was a pro player there. So it tends to, those local pros tend to, I don't know, their connections to that community are really what ignites somebody or a group of people to host an event or start the conversation at least.
The tour itself generates prize money for the players. Most players would probably tell you in any sport the prize money is not high enough. Is racquetball something that a professional can live off of, or is it something like yourself where it's almost a passion, but I've got to have something else to fund my daily expenses, my life?
It's a good question. If you ask our number one player or our top few players, they have definitely made it work through not just prize money, but through their sponsorships. And again, that goes back to their local sponsorship, the local connections they make. is really where they're getting a lot of their money, local brands. As far as the bigger picture, what's so interesting about the women's tour is that most of our players are studying to do something else after they're on the tour. We have players who are ready and have trained to be engineers and doctors and dentists and media personalities. I mean, they have plans for future and other things, but this is an opportunity right now for them to play a sport they love. They have an opportunity to compete, and they make it happen.
Got a question in the chat box from Andrew. It says, to the casual viewer, most tournaments look the same from the perspective of the camera, assuming you're live streaming, of course. From your boots on the ground and the players' perspectives, what sets these tournaments apart, and what are some examples of uniqueness for some of these tournaments? Some have banquets, some are known to attract more juniors, some don't include amateurs. How do tournaments keep it fresh for the players?
I like that question a lot. And as a former player, one of the best things was being able to travel around and experience different cities and the local cuisine and the local people and whatever they did to make their event special. And the players, I think if you ask the players that are currently on tour, they would say the same thing. They love the uniqueness of each event. They love to experience a city in Texas versus a city we just came from Boston this past weekend, but the uniqueness of each of those events, whether it's because San Antonio offers Tex-Mex food or the cannolis in Boston or the people or the way it's set up or any of those things that make it unique or very special to the tour players.
Do you have any specific examples of tournaments that have done things that were, I don't know, unusual? I mean, clearly the location and the food and things are going to be different in different places, but let's say, pick on Andrew. Let's say Andrew wanted to run a tournament. Is there something he could do that would be stand out so that players and fans know that this is different?
I would ask that tournament director, what represents your city? For example, we had an event several years ago in New Orleans. So the effort there was when the event was over, everybody went down to Bourbon Street and went to a karaoke place, and everybody sang and had a good time. It could be food. It could be anything that represents the local area. The players really love that about each event and being able to showcase that. I go back to San Antonio where one of the times we were there, we went and ate at like a roadhouse where they had a rodeo and that kind of thing. So just unique experiences aside from the players being competitive athletes, their life on tour and the travel and getting to know the other players on tour and those experiences, I think, are what they'll take with them forever.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons they played the tour.
Yeah. And from personal experience, I remember South Carolina for having a talent show, right? That was fun to see the players up there displaying some of their talents. Another question in the chat box was from Lynn. Sorry, I missed the first few minutes of the interview, but how is the LPRT organized? Is it a corporation? Is it a 501c3? How is it run?
That's my uncle, by the way. Hi. We are not a nonprofit because we pay out prize money. We are not a nonprofit organization. So we do work with nonprofits. We work with a lot of the state organizations, USA Racquetball. Some of the local event directors are also, they're raising money for a particular nonprofit in their area, which we love. You mentioned South Carolina and the Sweet Caroline Open. Every year we're at a tournament there. Their event actually raises money for local charities, and they pick a different one each year or two each year. So we get the tour players actually get to experience that as well. Like, it's not just about the tour; it's about what the tour is getting giving back to that local community and those charities. I would encourage tournament directors to look towards that too.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about the finances. What are some of the challenges how long have you been involved as commissioner? I should have asked that earlier.
So in 2016, I believe, is when I really, and I say I stepped in, but it wasn't without the players' involvement. I mean,
Right.
the players at the time, it wasn't just like I stepped in and said, I'm taking over. And to be honest, when I said I would do it, I said I would step in. There were players that said, "Oh, I don't know if she can do this. I'm not sure about her. Maybe it should be somebody else." And I actually applaud them for that. Now, I mean, they should ask questions, and they should. For me, it was always about the players and just making sure that the players had a good, safe place to play. And to be honest, I saw things with the tour at the time that I thought could be better. So I was willing to do it. I wanted to do it.
What do you see as some of the challenges associated with your job in particular?
Well, my job, a lot of my job is about building relationships. My job outside of our team of people that work for the tour or work together is really building relationships with our sponsors, getting to know them in the degree that what do they need from us, what do they want from us, what's important to them. And I would say the same thing for tournament directors. When I'm working with a local tournament director, wherever it is in Boston, or if it's in Arizona a couple weeks ago, I mean, just building that relationship so that we have communication going both ways. What we need as a tour and what do they need from us? What can we do to help them? Because we want the tour to be invited back. So we want it to be a positive experience both ways.
Is there a chain of command? I know you're commissioner. Do you have a board of directors? Do you have a group of players? How do you make decisions rather than you being essentially queen of the tour and determining everything yourself?
Absolutely have a team of people. We have an executive team. Funny that you asked him, as you are part of our executive team as deputy commissioner and our head commentator. But we have an executive team who is really the core group of people who travel to the events and are on site. And then we also have a board of directors that we meet kind of regularly just to check in, just if there's any major issues or any decisions. They're very supervisory in role, but at the same time, they're different members on the board of directors bring different skill sets to the tour that help the tour in different ways. From right down to one of the board of directors members updates our rankings. And it's just one of those things that is so important, but the work needs to be done for sure.
I've got two questions in the chat box, and both are sort of connected. So I'm going to post one and then I'm going to post the other. First one is from Steve, who says, LPRT has a deep field of international athletes. How are they recruited? And then Joe Hall says, I love the idea of the new under 21 pro division, both in the LPRT and the men's tour. What impact has that division had on participation? Are you seeing new talent?
Well, back to the first question from Steve. Thank you for watching, Steve, and being a supporter of the tour. As you see, when you look at the top ranked players on tour, most of those players are coming from countries that right now have a big racquetball presence. So we saw for a while, out of our top 10, there are a lot of Mexican athletes. Racquetball started in the U.S., but it migrated to Mexico, and it seemed like Mexico was the next big country to put out a lot of talent. And just geographically, as you travel to Central America, South America, we're seeing a lot of players now from Bolivia, a lot of talent, Central America as well. And Joe Hall of Splathead Racquetball here, talking about the 21 and under division. I was really impressed this past weekend. We had an event in Boston. We had a couple of sponsors sponsor the 21 and under division, which is really something that we call developmental division. Really impressed with the young athlete from Costa Rica who I hadn't seen play in about a year. She just came in and just, I mean, tore everybody apart. You can tell she had been working on her game so much. It's really impressive to see. In addition to that being a developmental division, I was saying this over the weekend too, that there's such a big jump to go from amateurs to professional, to go to collegiate to a professional tour. Our players make it look so easy when they play, but when you make that jump, some of these young players are coming on tour after they've won collegiates or they've won all their local open tournaments as an amateur, and they step onto the tour and they get their butt kicked, so to speak, and they step back and say, "Whoa!" But I was just winning everything, and now it's a whole nother level. So yes, we will try to do more of that developmental step, that step in between for those young players. I also wonder too, talking about this over the weekend with some of those junior athletes, does that step going from collegiates and winning into the pros, does that loss motivate a player to keep playing, or does that loss say, "Oh, wait a minute, I'm obviously not that good. I'm done. So the ones that stick around and put the time in, like our 21 and under winner over the weekend she obviously put the time in. Excuse me.
No, you're fine. This, of course, is predominantly a coaching show, yet I think we can learn from anybody working in sports and apply it. You've been around the sport for quite some time now. You've seen a lot of athletes compete. You've seen a lot of coaching. You may have seen a lot of athletes compete without coaches too. I'm curious what your perspective is regarding coaching as a generalization in racquetball.
Good question. And I really have two responses to that. One, as a former player, I wish I would have asked for more help. I didn't. To me, and I didn't play the tour full time in the respect that I quit my other job and just focused on being a professional racquetball player. I always had another job. So to me, I put a lot of time into it, but it wasn't the only thing I was doing. I didn't require winning a tournament to pay my rent or pay my mortgage or that kind of thing. So I wish I would, as a player, have asked for more help. No question. As a person, as a commissioner who sits sideline at events, and I watch these players and I watch these athletes and their interactions, I can only compare it to my personal experience as far as working with a group of people. I feel like in my position, I work with a lot of people, and I try to find people's strengths and weaknesses, and each of our team members, of our executive team members, bring something else to the table that helps support the tour. But I wouldn't necessarily interact with each of our team members in the same way. There are certain things I feel like each of our team members need from me, but it's not the same. And I would say, looking at some of the coaches, I would say the same thing. You have to know your athlete. You have to know your client. You have to know your sponsor. You have to know your tournament director. You have to be able to know what they need from you, as opposed to, like, these are my athletes, I'm going to treat them all the same way, and this is the way I coach. I think you really have to get to know your athlete.
In general, do most players have coaches present, or do most coaches have players who just travel solo? What's the norm?
So for our tour, there are some players that are able to bring their coaches along. For example, Team Argentina has a coach/team leader who travels with a group of Argentine players. But thanks to social media these days, we're streaming a lot of the matches live online. So sometimes the coaches are at home watching, and you'll see the players come out and they'll take a timeout and they'll come out and they'll get on their telephone and they'll really be communicating with their coach via their telephone. So the coach can sit at home and watch, and it saves the player expenses for their coach to be there in person. So it's a mix, and I would say if the coach isn't present, and let's say a tour match isn't being streamed live at that particular time, you will also see some of the players coach each other. They'll ask each other to be outside in their corner, so they have somebody who gets a bigger picture of the match, someone they can that says, "Hey, you need to take a timeout."
Curious what you think about that, players coaching other players who potentially they play on tour.
It's not ideal, obviously, but at the same time, in a sport like racquetball that's not being broadcast on mainstream television and doesn't have tons of money coming in, these athletes make do with the best that they can do. It's not the best situation, of course.
When I think of racquetball, you think of the traditional comparative sports like tennis, and obviously now pickleball and badminton, table tennis. We could go on. One of the things in tennis is that we have majors, right? We have 4 majors, whereas racquetball doesn't really have those 4 traditional things that are where men and women compete in the same location, et cetera. However, when you look at tennis, when there are majors, the women play the best of 3 and the men play the best of 5. Is that the same in racquetball? Is it that physical requirements for women are less, or are they equitable to what the men are expected to play?
Well, I would go back to say I don't know why the tennis tours play 2 different styles, other than similarly to the men's and women's racquetball tours. We're set up separately. We have different structures. We have different governing bodies of those tours. Excuse me. I'm getting over a cold. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
So the rules can be a little bit different according to the administrators and board of directors on each tour. So they can vary. If you're asking me if physically the women can't play as much as the men, I'd say absolutely not. Of course not. Yeah, I mean, the women demonstrate it. The women tour players demonstrate it all the time. They play both singles and doubles at most events, and most of our events last in basically 3 days. So they're playing a lot of matches in a 3-day time period.
There's been a push over the last decade, maybe 20 years, to equalize prize money across men's and women's sports, and we've seen that in those sports I already mentioned. In racquetball, do we see the same thing? If the men and women go to the same tournament, do we see equality across prize money?
I think there's a change recently. I've wrote about it a little bit in the past couple of years. I've pushed for it. I pushed for it a long time with no change for a while, but I mean, we're in a position that I absolutely think there's no question that if the tours are together at the same event, I mean, there's no question that the athletes should be paid equally. I mean, the top male player and the top female player are putting the same amount of work in. They should be paid equally. It's not a question for me. A lot of our tournament directors feel the same way. It's a lot of money for a local tournament director to raise to have both tours there.
Mhm.
So I mean, that's why we're separate a lot of times, but to me, it's essential. You have to.
I've got another question from Andrew, but I want to tack onto that because he was earlier asking about just what makes tournaments unique, and other sports have really started to change up the kind of tournaments they run. Not necessarily because we're in a certain location, but even just the format. As an example, tennis at the end of the year have their Masters, where top 4 come and compete in, or top 6, I think, compete in a round robin before going into seeding. Major League Pickleball now has teams of players competing against each other. They've gone and done rally scoring, whereas the pro tours are regular. I say regular, what is regular, but not rally scoring. Is there some leeway in there for the tour or tours to get creative and say, hey, we're going to do some different tournaments here with different looks, just because we want to try something new?
Yes. Yes, I agree that yes, there is room for that. I think sometimes when you break out of the norm and do something different, people tune in to see what you're doing.
Right.
So yes, absolutely. I think when you can be really creative, the more creative you can get, even if it doesn't work. I often say you just got to try stuff. If you get and just go with it, and if it doesn't work, then don't do it again. But I absolutely think that there needs to be creativity to draw attention for people, that for the regulars looking in, for the other people that just to look in and see what's going on, for sure.
And from a financial perspective, if somebody wanted to bring in the tour to their club and host an event, what would be the minimum requirement financially to do that?
So for this current season we're in, 18,000 for a tier 1, and then next season that goes up a little bit more to 20,000 for a tier 1, and then it goes up from there. So it's in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot when you're looking at comparing it to something like tennis or even pickleball right now. But there are different levels, and I would say on those lines, if there are people that want to support the tour and can't do 20,000 or can't write those big checks, there are also ways to support players. There are ways to support your local player. The players have sponsors. The players sometimes have a sponsor that'll pay their entry fee or help with airline tickets or that kind of thing. So all of those things also support the tour.
All right, Andrew's question, can you give an example of the biggest change you've observed in a pro player before and after they started working with a coach?
Ooh.
Or I should ask, are there players on the pro tour who don't have a coach? Wouldn't most of them, or if not all of them, have a coach already?
Well, I think most of them, when they're at home, probably work with somebody. And I say that doesn't always mean that their coach is the best for them. Kind of back to where I was saying that you have to know your coach. It maybe I mean, I can't call out anybody specifically. Yeah, it kind of put me on the spot there. I don't have an answer for that one.
Okay. No, I mean, if you're at the pro level, one would assume at some point you've been receiving coaching from somewhere, and hopefully that's a continuation. Little comment from Rod. Huge fan of the LPRT. It may seem a bit of an oxymoron, but the players themselves are the league's biggest resource. Their presence on social media, for example, is awesome. It's also the only sport I know where you can interact with the players face to face during tournaments, for example. That's a huge component of a pro sport, is the interaction players can have with fans.
Yes, agree. Nice to see you responding there, Rod. Yes, very different. Compare it to tennis, because tennis, most people know tennis or have seen it on TV. In tennis, you're in a stadium, you're removed from the players. The players arrive on the court and they play their match and then they leave. And you might snap a picture, get an autograph or something like that. But the way that racquetball is set up, your fans are courtside. You're right there in front of the court, and you're watching everything the player does. And then after the players' matches or they're waiting to play, they're just accessible. The women's tour, they tend to congregate around the club even if they're not playing. If they're lost and they're out of the tournament, they still tend to congregate around the club. Unless they're out exploring the city or location we're at. But yes, they're very accessible. The women's tour love to be asked questions, and I've seen people come and ask them for autographs, or pictures, but also questions about their game or why they did this or how do they serve a serve like that. You have that accessibility to racquetball players, racquetball pros that you don't always have to other pro athletes.
Last question for me, unless anyone else has any questions watching. Women's sports in general don't receive the same visibility, the same limelight, the same finances, exposure, you name it, compared to the male equivalent of that sport. Do you see that in racquetball as well?
I do. I mean, just based on followers and numbers alone, for the men's tour, yes. I think it's changed, especially over the last 5, 6, 10 years or so, with other sports like WNBA or women's soccer. I do see a big shift. I see a lot more sponsors and support going into women's sports and a big payback. I was just looking today at I like to follow along with the NCAA tournament, the Women's March Madness. And I've noticed there didn't used to be a March Madness bracket and things like that for the women's players, and now there are. So now you can fill out a bracket for March Madness for all the women's teams. So it's definitely growing. I think women's sport is a market. I mean, worldwide, internationally, that is there's so much room to grow. And it's a market where I think businesses should invest for sure.
Well, if people have questions, maybe watching in future or listening to our podcast, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Email would be great. TJ@lprtour.com. All
right, so that is TJ, no periods, nothing like that. TJ@lprtour.com. And TJ, thank you so much for joining me. I hope people do reach out and ask questions and engage. But on behalf of myself, Tim Baghurst, and of course, TJ Baumbaugh, thank you so much for watching.
Thank you, Tim.